Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the late show, you degenerates. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, Ben, we start late all the time here. We don't even really have a set start time for this show, so we start whenever we feel like, and you guys are always there for us, and I appreciate that about you. So thank you for joining us on Jackrabbit Illustrated. Obviously, I'm a little froggy here, but Borg is just getting back, so he's going to help me out. But thank you for showing up to the late night show with us on Jackrabbit Illustrated. As always, we are brought to you by Kubota Dealers of South Dakota with 10 locations across the great state of South Dakota. You can always get into some Borg equipment near you. They've got implements, tractors, side-by-side, skid steers, and everything else you might need for your home, for your acreage, for your ranch. They've got what you need. So get into a Kubota dealer today and get some high quality equipment. I know they are renowned for being very reliable pieces of equipment that are fairly easy to work on. So get into Kubota today. And as always, we are the late night show brought to you by Jackrabbit Central. You may have noticed that they did not have the team store open today in the stadium. That is an NCAA regulation. NCAA, that is an official NCAA event. When we have a playoff game at home and they do not allow sales of team gear, they only allow their tiny little booth of stupid NCAA gear, which I am incredibly unappreciative of. Suck it, NCAA. Stop being greedy. Jesus wept. Anyways, Jackrabbit Central is the place to be to get your best Jackrabbit gear that is that you anywhere around. That's where I got this snazzy hat. And tons of other things. I just got a robe actually during their Black Friday sale, or maybe it was Cyber Monday sale. It was 30% off, so it was great. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to Jackrabbit Central for being our show sponsor. And here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Zach Borg. Thanks for joining us here tonight again, Zach. Thanks for doing this all year with us.
Yeah, no problem. Obviously a little dark in the studio. Apologize for that. I'm also in the process of posting up our recaps. Another lovely consequence of the NCAA. You mentioned they can only sell the NCAA specific merchandise. We cannot post highlights. I'm sure veterans of this by now know the drill, but we cannot post highlights of the game to our website, even though they're all over social media, including,
So
as is the case with Twitter. Anybody can rip a highlight from the page and put it on their own page, and you really don't necessarily know. Nor are we allowed to actually shoot the games anymore, that's been the case for forever, but which is even more incredibly asinine now that there's a FBS playoff, which we know is their bread and butter, and they care more about, which is going to be a bigger thing now.
Technically, the playoff, the FBS playoff is not an NCAA event. That is
but I mean the TV. I mean, what drives this is obviously the TV networks pay the money to do this, and ESPN, because I mean Division II, Division III, you can shoot playoff games up until I think the championship. I mean we do that with Augustana, USF. NAI is a different ballpark, obviously, but they don't care with Division II and Division III because, I mean, I think ESPN actually did start taking over the lower round games, but they're obviously not paying the same levels of money for Division II and Division III. We do know they obviously re-upped the FCS deal. I don't know what the particulars are, but there's no way that deal is to the level they're getting for the FBS, and yet they've always done this thing where they basically made it like the NCAA basketball tournaments, where you cannot shoot a thing, which makes no sense for the FCS because the only people who really care about FCS are the local markets. And also another thing we found out this week, which impacted our decision to go to the volleyball tournaments, which we would have totally done since we had this incredibly rare. I'm telling you how we really feel because it's stupid. We would have gone probably to both the Coyotes and the Jackrabbits volleyball matches since they were just within a couple hours. And it was this incredibly rare thing of two teams from a very small league getting into the NCAA tournament. In previous years, they would let us shoot our own video of the opening rounds, which doesn't that's kind of rare. Doesn't happen in basketball anymore. The women's basketball, even though the women's basketball has the same setup where you do it on campus, they don't let that happen anymore. And we found out this year, first time, again, I'm guessing because the media rights deal got redone and volleyball is getting more lucrative. More people are watching, more people are going. Guess what? You're not allowed to shoot anymore. So,
yep. Yeah, I think it's all to do with that new media deal because the FCS and everything else, sans the college basketball tournament, March Madness, everything else is in its own bucket of a media deal. So a lot
of the women's sports are obviously getting a lot more attention, and that's good. It's good that they're getting more attention, more attendance. It's about time, frankly. But unfortunately, all the local people like us who have been televising these people and these sports for years get squeezed, which sucks. And what will inevitably happen is they will lay off a bunch of people at ESPN, and they'll be, going, "Woe is me! How did we lose our job?" Well, because you overpaid for a contract, and then it will filter back down to this level because we can't really do much anymore when we go to these tournaments. And then, it's just a stupid cycle. But people really don't want to hear about that because they want to hear about the football game right now. But either way, that's one reason, folks. I can't really give you nearly what I would normally give you on our website. But I'm posting this online. Obviously, if you can watch online, I'm going to have my morning sportscast tomorrow. We have a 9 a.m. show. So if you're up, you can watch the highlights again on that. I think online we occasionally have replays. But I will be posting the post-game interviews we did in the press conference with SDSU and USD. So that's kind of a common thing we do. That's the one thing we can at least share is the post-game sound. So, it's the best we can do out of a bad situation there, which sucks. And obviously we did a lot of pregame stuff. Well, we've been doing the pregame shows. A little challenging this week. We had some technical issues, but we had live interviews with Jimmy, who was great. I had a live interview with Bob Nielsen, which frankly, both of those were shocking to me because neither of them even did that a year ago. I was stunned. They both were willing to do live interviews on game day. And so kudos to the both of them for doing a live interview on, day of the game. Granted, their games were later in the afternoon, but still, that's pretty cool of them. And, good on them I don't think we'll be getting that next week as we start to break in the times. But I guess number one thing, why don't we let's do the one bit of breaking news here because I'm guessing a lot of people, before we get into the discussions, I'm guessing a lot of people may not yet be aware of the times for the FCS semifinals, which have just kind of or semifinals, quarterfinals. They have just come down. I got to pull up that. You sent me the link, ironically.
Yes.
But so the first quarterfinal is going to be on Friday night. That's going to be, and this was not a shock. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be Idaho at Montana State just because Montana being in a different time zone. So it's going to be Idaho at Montana State. We're going to get a chance to see Jason Eck. I'll get into this later. I think there's a real, I don't want to say upset potential. I think they're going to give him a really good game. As we saw today in a lot of games, the theme of this day, other than the SDSU game and maybe the Montana State game, was nothing really went to chalk. And UC Davis was, after the first quarter, was pretty impressive.
Well, everything went chalk, but not many teams covered the way they were expecting.
Not chalk in the way you expected, because a lot of these games ended up being very, very, they were eye-opening. And certainly, certainly some teams have some things to work on.
Yeah, and I think realistically, the way it went is if you look at the results for the whole day, the surprising ones just happened to be the NDSU and USD game. Montana State blew them out. SDSU blew them out. Idaho blew them out, and those were expected. Mercer was tight with Rhode Island. That was kind of expected. UC Davis blew out Illinois State, which if you go by the line wasn't expected. If you listen to us, it was expected. So realistically, the two surprises were, and the reason I think the whole thing feels like there's a ton of surprises is because two of what you consider your top 4 national title contenders struggled for most of their game.
Yeah, and not only that, 2 teams you thought were pretty solid defensively struggled on that end. I mean, obviously USD. I think USD scored on almost every possession they had. They only really missed on 2. I mean, that's the one thing I would say that is really the positive for USD coming out of this game is, and we'll get into that later because obviously we're going to start off with the Jackrabbits here, but right now Josh Davis is on a roll. He's calling some really good football down there. I mean, they. With that game on the line, he busted out some ballsy calls, and he was not afraid to go a little Jason Eck himself. So I would say this. I don't know if it'll translate next year. I mean, he could be a guy who is in line whenever Bob steps down. That could be Travis Johansson too. I don't know, but I think Josh is setting himself up at some point to be a head coach. We'll see, but. Josh, I mean, he had a very good day calling that offense, and they have just been on a roll for a while now. So, but yeah, defensively, although I will say the Coyotes, their secondaries had some issues going back to that NDSU game when Cam got really hot and started burning them after they got up 14-0, and continued today with that really funky offense that we'll talk a little more about because I had to see that thing to believe it because it was like. I wanted to play like that sweet Georgia Brown as that guy was slowly just like, it was just, somebody had mentioned that to me last week, a Coyote fan was like, man, we should be able to tee off on that thing. And it's like easier said than done. Good Lord. But yeah, the NDSU game was a shocker. I think we all kind of inevitably knew that game would probably end up going to the Bison because they've had a few games like that in the playoffs before that have started like that, but their back end does have issues. And of course, they were thinking maybe they were going to get Cole Wisniewski back. He ends up going to the portal. And you still have to wonder if there's some lingering stuff from what happened with the USD game 2 weeks ago. I still expect them to beat Mercer. I haven't seen enough of Mercer, so I'll confess I have not seen enough of them. I'm still thinking of them from what we saw a year ago, which isn't fair. But it's hard for me to imagine them going into Fargo and giving them a great game. But I didn't expect that from Abilene Christian. So we'll see. I mean, I said it a few weeks ago on Twitter. Everybody is just too many people are assuming this is going to go too easily with those top 4 seeds. And every year, even if the top teams do advance, it's tougher than we expect. It was tougher for South Dakota State a couple, in each of the last 2 title games with Holy Cross back in 2022. Sluka, people forget if they'd chosen to go for it instead of kick a field goal that they missed at the start of the 4th quarter, I think they would have had the lead in the 4th quarter on that team. And then last year, that Villanova game in the wind, that was a bear. So, as much as I know people will, I know people were kind of going, USD, but I'm like, this is what happens. Same with NDSU. This just happens. Even if these teams win, it's just never easy. And even Jimmy kind of alluded to that in the post game. He's like, you never know when your national championship game is going to be in this tournament, because if you overlook somebody or if you have a bad game, somebody can end it for you right there.
Well, I think it's important to remember. Don't go off of one game necessarily when you're judging these teams in the playoffs where you're facing teams you're not used to, offenses you're not used to, or teams that are really, really used to you. There's so many variables in these playoff games. Remember that the whole season is more indicative of what that team is than their result if they don't win by that much in one playoff game. Mercer looked like hot garbage today, says Garrett Meyer. NDSU by 24 plus. I would lean heavy NDSU in that game, but I'm not surprised Mercer didn't look good in that game. Rhode Island has a stout defense. That's how they got where they were. It's interesting to me that NDSU is going to be going from facing a team that is all offense, no defense, to facing a team that is all defense and no offense. I do honestly think NDSU is better equipped to face a Mercer than they are an Abilene Christian who likes to put up a ton of points, just because they are so much stronger defensively, or NDSU is so much stronger offensively. I think their offense can overcome a good defense, but I think their defense against a really hard good offense has a tougher time and can get exposed occasionally. But in that NDSU game too, though, you know, you got excited. You're like, oh my God, they're down 14-0. Oh my God. You know, and then all of a sudden NDSU goes up.
You knew it was going to happen.
And you go, it's done. This is absolutely done.
You knew it was going to happen when they kicked the field goal after after we nearly got the thick six of Cam Miller. Because if you don't, I think I saw Sam Herder tweet it, but you knew it when they got the field. Sam Herder tweeted, you have to keep the pressure on them when you're in that dome. And I know it wasn't a big crowd, relatively speaking, for them. The final, and I'm not going to, we can talk about this later. I know McFeely had kind of a McFeely-esque incendiary tweet about all the attendance numbers. I'm kind of over all that. And I'll say this, for me, I thought the crowds here and I thought the crowd Vermilion, for the circumstances here, I thought they were fine. I mean, this is just a different, you know, up in Fargo, it's a different deal. They've had generations of playoff football. The schools here have not had generations of playoff football. That it was not a thing at SDSU. USD had a brief moment in the 80s, but they've not had it. So, you know, if this becomes a thing for SDSU where we've got playoff football for 20 some years and we're still struggling with this in, you know, 2040, then yeah, I think then you have to, but you have to build this before. I mean, I think today was the high water mark for a second round game, 10,000. I mean, you got to start. You know, now we'll see what happens next week. We'll see what happens. I'm kind of afraid with that start time, which if you have not heard, is going to be the 11 a.m. game. It's not ideal, but it will be on ESPN, so it's going to be nationally televised. For the rest of you, I mentioned the Montana State game will be with Idaho. That's going to be the Friday night game. North Dakota State and Mercer gets the 2:30 ABC game. That's not a thrilling thing for my station because we would have loved to certainly be televising a game with a South Dakota school. And it was ironic because I quoted something from Izzo, who was, I think he was maybe trying to pull a jinx on it because even he didn't think the Bison would get the 2:30 game, but I was not shocked. They're the bigger brand. I kind of had hoped that maybe because the South Dakota schools were playing teams in bigger markets that maybe they would want to get more potentially have it on in bigger markets, get more eyeballs on it. But at the FCS level, that's probably not as big of a thing. And then, somebody had mentioned this in the comments. The Coyotes did not get even though I think the Coyotes on paper have the more compelling game, seed line wise, it is the 4-5. And certainly after what developed today, you can make a case that might be the closest game. Although, again, we'll see what happens because you just never know. That 4-5 game with Davis and USD, they're going to have the late start, and they're the only game that's going to be streaming only, as they will play the. I got to double check that time. Yeah, they've got the 3:00 start at the Dome, and it's just ESPN Plus. So again, Idaho, Montana State, Friday night at 8:00. That'll be on ESPN, the mothership. Incarnate. Then on Saturday, you've got 3 games: Incarnate Word, SDSU at 11 a.m. Mercer, North Dakota State at 2:30 on ABC, KSFY, Dakota News Now. Although we don't really want you. I mean, we want you to still watch our channel, but that kind of sucks. Either way, I don't want to bag on our programming. I'm going to bag on the Bison. And then at 3:00, Davis and South Dakota. And again, we will have another Road to Frisco pregame show. Well, Ben, I mean, unfortunately, they don't really care about either South Dakota school right now because South Dakota State would have made a lot more sense. I think that was what Izzo was predicting would be the ABC game. I think that made more sense because I didn't think it was going to be South Dakota 2 years in a row in Vermillion. That you're not going to put them in the same. That was no slight on USD. I don't think you're going to put them 2 years in a row in the same slot. I thought, school out of Texas with Incarnate Word, San Antonio, 2-time defending FCS national champions. I kind of agreed with Dom on that one, that maybe the Jacks would get the ABC game. And also, by the way, for those who do not know, both semifinals the following week will be on ABC. So regardless, there will be no streaming. They'll both be on big ABC after that. So, and yeah, I mean, I agree. That's definitely a come down for the Coyotes a little bit, but I don't, at the same time, part of me is like, who cares? You just want to be in the playoffs at this point. So it beats the alternative of being at home because you got upset by Tarleton or, whoever. But yeah, it's I'm a little disappointed that you couldn't be, that neither one of them could get the ABC game for our station's sake. But I'm not surprised because obviously NDSU is still the bigger brand after all the national titles, despite the fact that they certainly have not been as dominant in this decade, to say the least.
Yeah, and in the end, it is what it is. You're on the channel that you're on, and in the end, you're gonna end up on ABC if you win. So it's fine. We should probably talk about the game that did happen today.
Yeah, we have not. We've been on this now for 20 minutes, and we have not talked about what, for my money.
Yes,
I think other than. I think you can make a case that was maybe the most impressive. I mean, I obviously confess I didn't have too big of an eye on Montana State and Illinois State and Davis, but do you really have much to complain about if you're a Jackrabbit fan tonight? Because that was a very, other than the first possession where they botched one handoff. I mean, I guess you got to have something if you're Jimmy. I'm sure Jimmy will come up with more things, but I think even he kind of said at some point in the presser. I know the offensive guys said essentially to a point that was one of the more complete offensive games they played all year, and that was despite the fact the third quarter was kind of boring and a wash. That was a complete game. I mean, they manhandled that team. I think we knew Montana wasn't as good as they were a year ago, but still Montana. They're not this isn't Drake. This isn't pick the lower level teams. This is still a Montana, and they still have Junior Bergen, who was invisible except for I think he had like one fourth down catch, I think, on that field goal drive. That was it. I mean, obviously, he didn't even get a chance to return anything or very little. Eli Gilman did nothing. I mean, I don't know if their color guy finally got to say Yahtzee because they got 2 touchdowns in garbage time. But,
it sure felt like Houck was really invested in being the team that got to score 2 touchdowns against SDSU.
Yes.
Calling timeout.
Chad Myros wants me to give him crap for the 2-point conversion. I'll confess I was working on my show and I kept looking. I'm like, why is this game taking so long to end? And then I looked up. I'm like, is he going for 2? Why? With 4 seconds left?
Just to make him look better is my opinion.
Bobby being Bobby.
Yeah, and quick before we get too carried away, I have to also mention our segment sponsor of Cubby Sports Bar and Grill of downtown Brookings, South Dakota on Main Street. They are the best sports bar in the state of South Dakota. Yes, that is my opinion. They have roughly 30,000 TVs in there. That is an unscientific guess. But they also have Italian nachos back for the month of December, and they are fantastic. Went up on Friday, got some. It was funny. We went up and got some of those, and we got some Culver's soda and ice cream on the way out of town. And I looked at Ariel and said, man, 2 sponsor trip. The Grizz are screwed. And that's the way that went. So I will make sure to do that again next week. But Cubby Sports Bar and Grill, all the proceeds from the Italian nachos are going to go to Alex's lemonade stand, which is phenomenal. Awesome. Really appreciate Cubby's doing that for us. But also, if you post those pictures, they've been coming in. Post those pictures, tag Jackrabbit Illustrated, tag Cubbies, so we can see that and get our pledges in, because as of right now, every picture that you post of the Italian nachos that you get is worth $14 to Alex's Lemonade Stand to fight childhood cancer. And all it takes is posting a picture. You're either for childhood cancer or you're against it, so might as well post a picture to be against it. It's not that hard. So beyond that, yeah, so thank you to Cubby Sports Bar and Grill for being one of our great sponsors. On this game, the lines really stood out to me at first. You could tell Amar had a great game because of his running style. It was just an Amar game, in my opinion. You could see his patient style and his vision really paid off with how aggressive and how hard they try to get upfield with their defensive lines and their blitzes and stunts and everything. But beyond that, God, it was just dominant. The whole game was. Someone on Twitter was silly enough to go, "Oh, pretty pedestrian performance." Like, are you kidding
I guess
me?
they only watched the last couple minutes of the fourth quarter when they scored the 15 points in garbage time. I mean,
right?
What?
No, that was before the 15 points were scored.
Oh my god!
So what do you what?
That is a.
Do you not? That means you don't watch.
That's a. I said this a lot last year, a couple times when I kind of thought maybe people were taking it for granted with the super team, or maybe being a little snobbish toward the Coyotes. And I'll say it to that guy: don't become a Bison fan, because that's being arrogant. That's just taking for granted what you have.
Yeah.
Come on. If you're looking, we didn't score enough points. We're only up 21-3. What? Come on. So, they missed a field goal. They botched one exchange. I'm sorry. I'm not, I guess if you want us to be more, if you want the media up here to be a little more negative and hard on them, we could, but, just don't be a Bison fan. It's like that. Enjoy this. Enjoy what you got. You don't have to be hypercritical all the time of the team. I mean, that's nitpicking. That, if it had been within a one score game, then sure, then I'd say maybe a little underwhelming. But there was really no point, even after that. There was no point where I think that game felt like it was in danger.
No, not even when Angel fumbled and then they went down and kicked a field goal. It was like, okay, well, that sucked. Maybe they get some momentum and make this a game, but I kind of doubt it. And sure enough, they march right back down, score a touchdown. The offense was straight up just driving, doing whatever they wanted on that field. Take their time methodically down the field and score touchdowns. And it was a thing of beauty.
And I would encourage you, because I know SDSU posted both press conferences, both theirs and Montana's. Go and look at it, because I think I might have asked it, or somebody asked it. I know I asked a question to Hawk about, what was the difference between this year's offense and last year's offense for SDSU? Because obviously, last year's had all the pro guys, had all the 6-year seniors. And I think somebody also asked him too, what was different defensively with them. Somewhere in there, he said something about how they're just tougher, they hit harder. And at some point, I'm a little verbatim here, so that's why I'm saying maybe watch a little bit of it. And somewhere in there, he says, frankly, I wish our guys would take a page from them. So, and of course, there's that. I know Matt Zimmer posted, apparently SDSU had pictures of him holding a rabbit. I think this was from last week.
Yeah, we brought it up last week on the show.
I did not see. Yeah, I didn't see the show. I didn't know Bobby did this. I mean, it's not a shock, because he does some things like this. But at the same time, I quoted Zimmer's tweet. I'm like, does Bobby remember that he was the head coach and that the guy on the other side had his career end about as painfully as his playing career end as painfully as possible to Bobby? And like, every time you play this guy, he probably wants to rip your head off, and you just gave him more. You're already at the extreme disadvantage.
Well, we
And
aren't certain when we looked at that. We're not 100% certain that wasn't something a Grizz fan did. To be honest, that was a some sort of Photoshop or something. But let that be a lesson to everyone out there. Don't put out extra motivation for the other team. If
I mean,
if you do
you
too
think
good of a job, they'll use it.
I mean, you think the Grizz fan? I mean, we I think both media. I mean, and they got a lot of good media up there in Missoula too. I mean, and they had some media come out here. I know that they were out in Cubbies last night. Actually, I told them, good on them to find the right spot. But yeah, I don't know whether that was faked or not. It's like the storyline last year was definitely out there that Jimmy Rogers in 2009 was a player in that game, and he's still hurt over that. Like that's still, I don't want to say haunts him, but he did not forget it. It wasn't like, oh, it doesn't matter. He's like, yeah, I don't want my guys to feel like what I felt. Now he got, I think maybe he's maybe not as prevalent because they got the championship win. But anytime you give him a little extra motivation with that team and that coach, he's going to remember. It's going to be a little different than if it were maybe coming from Montana State or UC Davis or somebody else in the Big Sky. So, yeah, I don't know, Ben. I somehow I don't think Incarnate Word. Maybe he will. I don't want to speak for Jimmy, but I just, of all the people, aside from maybe North Dakota State, I mean, I don't even know if the Coyotes would engender that kind of reaction from Jimmy because he never played them. Although I'm sure he's got a lot of respect for the Division II era, and obviously Stig had a lot of battles with him. But yeah, the only other team that I think would have the kind of reaction, would get any kind of visceral reaction, would be NDSU. And I don't even know if it would be that, just because not only is it Montana, but it's the same exact coach. And I don't care if it's high school or college, you never forget if you lose your last game in a playoff. You never forget it. You never forget the last game if you lose a playoff, whether it's your high school football or your college. And the way they lost that game is, anybody who says, I'd rather lose there's no good way to lose your final game. And that was the worst. Losing a blowout sucks. Losing a close game sucks. I can't imagine losing that way. So, yeah, Bobby, if you play him again, you can't be doing that stuff if that was you. And the fans, you got no excuse because you knew that storyline a year ago. That storyline about Jimmy in 2009 was hammered into the ground by both media outlets. And, so just see what happens, F around and find out.
And they incessantly have to bring Mark Mariani into the picture every time before they play us on their school's podcast, on the Montana Athletic Department's podcast. They had Mark Mariani on there. It's like,
I mean, is probably
keep doing it.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I talk with some SDSU people and they're like, as much as that one is, the game when they were Division II in 1993, I think they said it was even more improbable. But I just don't think many people will remember that, in either school. Certainly because it wasn't a playoff game. And obviously, now you're talking 30 years ago. But there was a regular season game in 93 where SDSU lost a lead kind of even more improbably. But, I will say seriously, I almost tweeted this. I didn't have time because I went over to go shoot the basketball too. I really wish these schools would play a series together or two, start scheduling something, especially after that. I kind of wanted to ask him in the post game, about, hey, now that you've finally been here, would you consider, because, but, as much as that, I don't want to be that much of a dick because he's got two guys next to him. One of them got one of them I think was a native Montana, and he obviously got pretty emotional when asked about, what's this mean to, what did it mean to you to be you're not going to, it was not the right time to ask that, so, but in all seriousness, there's no reason these two teams shouldn't be playing a series. Now, maybe And it's not that they won't come to South. I made a joke when I posted some pictures. I'm like, they finally come down from the Mecca of FCS, as we heard their radio crew call it. And they do have a good radio crew. Their color guy, I get a little annoyed with the Yahtzee thing he does. It's a little weird, but they got a good radio crew. But it's not that they won't come to South Dakota. They played in the 11 years I've been out here. They played 4 games with USD, and 2 of them were at the Dakota Dome. So they played home and homes with them. And even though I'm sure people are saying, well, they played USD when they weren't good, 3 of those games were close. 3 of them were competitive. I think both games in the Dome were
NDSU too.
Yeah, they have a home and home with it. Yeah, and UND, and obviously they were conference. Yeah, so and Bobby comes here. And like we made a deal out of saying that they hadn't come here since 1970. Now I understand some of that makes sense. SDSU was Division II for so long, and as much as we all have a soft spot for Coughlin, probably not. They probably weren't that interested in playing at Old Coughlin alumni in the early days of D1. But now this facility, you've got the right facility. It's one of the best ones in the FCS. There's no reason that they can't play out here. And, to hear Bobby say that, I wish our team would take some cues. Well, let's just be honest. I know they got to the title game a year ago, but this isn't the Montana. When I went to work out there in 2010, and when SDSU and NDSU transitioned up, they were the gold standard. They are, even though they didn't have the championships that SDSU and NDSU have now, and part of that's because the FCS was just so much better. They went to a lot of title games, but they would run into some better teams that just are not, if SDSU were running into some of these teams, who knows if SDSU and NDSU would have as many titles if the FCS were still as deep as it was.
It was Montana and UNI at the time. They were kind of the Western powers.
And, but the point of it was that was who SDSU and NDSU wanted to be. They very near, originally when they both came up, they wanted to both be in the Big Sky, and they got denied. I don't remember what the exact thing was, but, and obviously it worked out better for them because the Valley / Gateway, what it was then known as, made more geographical sense. God, it would have been pretty damn expensive if they'd have been all. We saw how bad it was for UND to be in the Big Sky, and we wouldn't have a Summit League tournament if they had been in the Big Sky. So, anyway, things ended up well there. But if you want to get Montana back to what Montana was, iron sharpens iron. You might lose a game to the Jacks like this. You might keep losing to NDSU. You might even take some losses to USD now that they're elevating their program. But if you keep playing these games, you're going to get an idea of what it takes. You're going to maybe recruit out a little bit better, and you're going to raise your program up. And those kind of games are good for the FCS. That Montana State, I remember they started playing SDSU before. When Choate was the coach, and they got waxed out here in 2019, but they started getting a little bit better. It's just,
and God, that Montana NDSU series, when they played week 0 back when week 0 started and meant something.
That wasn't even Bobby.
And Jackson, the announcer, Jackson, the granddaddy of them all. I
think that was Musburger.
Maybe Musburger.
He's Musburger. He's a Montana native.
Yeah, he announced that game. Like, if you see the highlights, he's announcing that game like that. Yeah. Those games are huge, and they're great for the FCS, and then sometimes they don't happen. Chad mentions Youngstown. They were kind of at that time, but they were earlier. Were for Montana, they were definitely existed at the same time, but Youngstown lasted and died off, and then UNI came up, and
I've got a great one here.
Early 2000s.
I didn't get a chance to do this in our show because we had some technical issues and we had to dump this, but I got to thinking how many national championship game rematches had there been in the FCS. Mm-hmm. And this is the 47th tournament, formerly 1AA. It started back in, I believe it was 77. So how many times had there been a title game rematch the following year? This was the 8th. Previously, and now with SDSU winning, the team that won the year before is now 3-5. So, the last rematch, by the way, had been a while. It was 2012 when SDSU beat Sam Houston, or NDSU beat Sam Houston for the second straight year. That was right at the start of their dynasty run. But and he mentioned Youngstown. Youngstown actually played. It was Marshall. Played Marshall 3 years in a row in the mid-90s when Tressel was the coach. But there was a back-to-back title matchup in 95-96, and I messaged you about this privately the other day. In 1995, Montana won their first ever national title. Don Reed was the head coach. The quarterback today, by the way, and there's an interesting discussion we can have about why Montana ever switched quarterbacks, because we never really got an explanation why. But obviously Montana's quarterback today was Keelia Yacht. His dad was the quarterback on their title team in 95. And I don't remember what the exact score was. I think it was kind of a close game. They played that in Huntington, in where Marshall is. So Marshall loses that game to Montana. They made a notable offseason pickup. I'm going to leave it at that. And in 1996, they meet again in the championship. Much more lopsided score. I think it was like 56-20 something. Somewhere in that ballpark. Marshall went off and got their revenge. The guy they picked up was Randy Moss.
Yeah, and they had some schlub quarterback called Chad Pennington at the same time.
I don't know if Pennington was the quarterback in that game. I think it was somebody. Really? Pennington, I think, was the next year.
Oh.
But yeah, you're right. Pennington was but because I did tweet out I found the highlights of him, and it was somebody else. It was like a number 15 was throwing, but of course, right after Pennington was then a guy who got drafted pretty highly too. I can't remember his name. Played for the Jaguars. And that was Marshall's last year in Division I AA. They ended up going the next year up to FBS. I really wish we still had 1A and 1 AA. That would make so much more sense, especially since FBS and FCS was just made to denote who had a playoff, and now they both have playoffs.
The 1A and 1 AA does make more sense.
But I want to look this up now because I haven't tweeted this yet, and I probably will. But Randy, I'm going to look this up now just because I want to look at the stats because, as we talk about this game, Griffin Wilde was beast mode today. What was that?
Byron Leftwich.
Yeah, Byron Leftwich. There you go. God, they went from Chad Pennington to Byron Leftwich. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
FCS title.
For a FCS school to go from that to that to that. Honestly, that's kind of what NDSU did a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah. Early on, certainly. But yeah, that game, I'm pulling this up now because I want to look at the stat line. And I also feel kind of weird mentioning this because obviously Randy Moss is going through something because he's left his job and hopefully he's doing okay. He's got some kind of health issue. Yeah. But that 95 thing, I've now got the score pulled up. Montana won in 95, 22-20. That was their first national title. Of course, I think it was in the next decade, they won another with Joe Glenn. But they've been stuck at 2 since. They've been to a lot of title games. They just couldn't. They ran into some really good teams and came up just short in a lot of them. But in 96, it was 49-29. And Randy, if you've seen that, there was a documentary, I think it was Rand University, which kind of talked about his, a lot of the troubles he got into were just smoking marijuana, for one thing.
Right.
Which, traffic stops in Minneapolis, but, not that he didn't necessarily compound some of these things, but, he should have been at Florida State, and I think it was a marijuana thing got him there. But yeah, Moss in that game, in that championship rematch, 9 catches, 220 yards, 4 touchdowns. Jesus. So today, so Griffin Wilde's got some nice company today when you think about it, because he had a big game in a championship rematch. Griffin Wilde's stat line today not quite as big as Randy Moss's, but 7 catches, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. You're about halfway there. You almost got him on catches, and you're about halfway there on yards. So, Griffin Wilde and Randy Moss can share a little link in history. They both beat
cool.
they were the leading receivers in a championship rematch wins over Montana. So
that's true.
Very little link. Maybe they'll both. Maybe Griffin will end up in the pros too. I kind of think he's going to end up in the NFL at some point. I don't know if he'll have Rand. If he has Randy's career, we'll really have something to talk about. But
right, that would be something.
Tucker Kraft's having a nice little career too. So
yeah. I want to address this. Dan Furman says Montana's the Nebraska of the FCS. I would argue that Youngstown is the Nebraska of the FCS, where they went and had the title runs and the notoriety and have been doing nothing since.
Well, they did have one miracle title game run recently, fairly recently. But yeah, they were.
I would say Montana is the Texas of the FCS, because the question is always, is Montana back? Up until last year when they made the national title run. That would be my argument, that Montana is Texas, and are they back?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Because Texas, even when they're not, Texas still has the resources. They just never kind of, and that's what Montana is. They still have the resources, but they're just not. It's like you're just kind of like, what are you doing, guys? I think the Youngstown too is also a tricky one, because I think it's where they're located has also kind of hurt them. It's a Rust Belt town. Yeah. I think the city is kind of, obviously Youngstown's gone through a lot of depression with the steel market, and I don't know. That's kind of it's a tough area down there. I think it was during the championship runs too. They had that brief. They've still got probably one of the more improbable runs to a title game in the history of the tournament, when they went, when they got to the championship and nearly beat Eastern Washington. No, it was Eastern Washington. No, it was James Madison. James Madison in 2016. They've been the only one that basically wasn't a Dakota in the last decade plus out of the Valley. So, but it's been, people do not realize it's just kind of obscured because they've not done anything for so long. They played in 3 straight title games. I can look this, I got so many windows up now. I don't even know where I was, but another one that was really good at the outset of the FCS was Eastern Kentucky. They really haven't been anything for a while.
Speaking of the history stuff, Blazer, you keep posting that stuff. I didn't read any of those comments off on the screen, but that's pretty cool. He says, fun fact, this subdivision, now known as the FC Football Championship subdivision, or the FCS, started as NCAA Division 1AA in 1978. Florida A&M defeated Massachusetts to win the first ever FCS 1AA title.
Yeah,
they beat them.
I was going through all those. I went through all those championship games because I was trying to figure out the rematches, and I was trying to come up with a good stat, and I'm like, have in-state schools ever played each other? Because obviously we're kind of thinking about that a little bit. Never been an in-state matchup. 2 schools from the same state have never played each other. So
gotta be a real shame if that stayed the same.
I know
I'd be all broke up out of Borg. That'd be so sad.
I would be our sales department would be, well, of course, fittingly it's not on ABC this year. It's going to be on ESPN, but I think we would still probably sell some decent advertising, I think, for our coverage of that event, if the entire especially.
I'm not cheering against your success, Borg. I'm just cheering against
the University of South Dakota. Yes, I understand that. But there is one. I do have a little thing in mind. Just because we heard all the stuff a few weeks ago from the seeding about how the Division II thing costs NDSU and USD, and I'm not saying it didn't have a part in the resume. I'm just saying it wasn't the sole. If both of them had a Division I game, they would be, one of them would be the 2 right now. I don't believe that for a minute. I don't believe if SDSU had scheduled, and I've even talked to some people who's like, no, if they put Stetson on there, they're not the 2 seed right now. But it was it was a factor. So I just got a little thing in my head, which I would really love to use. I don't want to say it, but especially if it is an all South Dakota title game, I've got something in my brain that's ruminating.
You would never troll online.
Oh, I never would, but God, I have it would be so fun. And if one of them loses or both of them lose, and I'll mention what it was. But God, if it happens, it would be like I said, if we get that semifinal round of both schools winning, that would probably be one of the more memorable sports days in the history of the state, especially considering that they're both on the road and they pull off two big road wins like that in front of what will probably be 19, 20,000 people at both places. So it's like there's not much more you can add to that, but I'm just going to give like a little chef's kiss to our friends up north for. I love stirring the pot a little bit.
Yeah, up north, media wise, they sure love dancing about the D2 game. They really, really did.
Yeah, I mean, I finally went back and forth a little bit with Dom. I'm just like, I don't know what it's like. I think the one thing that kind of bugged me was the implication that both schools wanted to skip. Like, okay, yes. Look, I mean, it's like, for one thing, at SDSU, if you remove the games that were scheduled because they had two teams cancel 3 games, Utah Tech and, ironically, Tarleton, if you remove those, they hadn't scheduled a Division II game since 2014. The same was true of USD, which I find funny because obviously USD, of all the teams that would have an excuse to schedule a Division II or lower, would have been USD over the last decade when they were struggling. But even they hadn't scheduled Division II since 2014. They basically did it this year because, again, the schedule expanded to 12 teams. So this idea that they wanted to schedule it, and then they were all getting on, they celebrated it. I'm like, well, why? It was these were press releases. You think they're just going to say, bag on in-state schools? Like, just say, right. We hate that we're playing
We're pretty angry that we've had to schedule this game, but I guess we have to play them. Like, no school says that. Look, they can look in the mirror a little bit. NDSU is crowing about we play Tennessee State in Nissan Stadium. No, you're going on the road and you're playing Tennessee State because that's where Tennessee State plays. Don't try to doll it up as if you got some special deal to play in the Titan Stadium. That's just where Tennessee State plays.
And again, it was funny because, I also heard him at one point say, he actually said this, and I really wanted to push more. It was a day or two after, and I'm like, Zach, just be smart. It's a dead horse, and sometimes I will confess this, I don't know when to stop beating the dead horse, and it gets me a few times. But he at one point on his show, he said if SDSU had scheduled St. Thomas, they would have the 2 seed. And I really just wanted to go nuts because people around here know, who did St. Thomas lose to this year? Who did they lose to? The University of Sioux Falls. Yep. Come on. Seriously, not that we're not exactly Bison defenders here, but that would be that if that is honestly how we're deciding on a seed line, and this was kind of a rare year. I don't know if we'll ever see a conference race like this. It won't happen very often, where you had 3 teams that were that good, went 1-1 against each other, and you couldn't delineate. If that's how we're deciding a seed, that's a terrible way to decide it, because really a division, some of the it's a dirty secret, and I don't mind that a Pioneer League team gets a playoff bid. That's my gripe with the FBS playoff. That's why I've said I'm not a big fan of going to the FBS, because I wish every conference in FBS had a bid into that playoff. Yep. Give everybody a seat at the table. Make it big enough to where, put more, make a 24 team FBS playoff. You're going to make piles of cash with that. That's, to me, that would be when FBS is truly worth moving to, but they're never going to do that because they're never going to let the little guys in. I mean, God, look at how that works with the basketball. But we know that the Pioneer League is basically Division III. They have non-scholarship. So, I mean, when you're telling me that SDSU would get the number 2 seed, and he, to be fair, he doesn't know that. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't know, but my God, Sioux Falls killed that team. And you're telling me you're telling me NDSU, who, I'm not taking anything away from USD, but it took a pretty unlikely set of circumstances for USD to win that game. Whether you want to say NDSU blew it, USD came, it was a little bit of everything. Does NDSU really deserve to be knocked down to a 3 seed in his scenario or a 4 seed because they lost a difficult game on the road to another one of the top 2, 3, or 4 teams in the country, and then SDSU goes above them because they beat a team who lost to a Division II team, but they're technically Division I, even though they're really more compatible Division III. Sorry, it's Division I win. Automatically, you rise above. That's stupid. I mean, as much as we may be this, obviously, I'm on the Jackrabbit Illustrated podcast right now, so yeah, you guys would prefer that. But I think we can all agree that's, if the shoe were on the other foot, that's a stupid way. You just have to be a little practical here. There has to be some common sense when applying these things. And, I mean, it's just, come on. I mean, there are just so many teams in FCS that are basically Division III, are not good FCS teams. And that's why McFeely wrote a column where he went back to the old line of thinking, which is these games don't even count on your resume. And the committee came back and said, no, they do count. It's just, not going to count toward your strength of schedule. So again, it's just, I get it, but it's just not one of those, it didn't, I will say this again. It's not the reason SDSU is the number 2. It was a factor. I just think NDSU had the better strength of schedule at the end of the day. And frankly, I think Jimmy wants to go back up there. I think a lot of that SDSU team I'm not saying they're going to go win. I think they want the smoke. This is one. I think they want it more than any team in the history of this program has wanted it to go back up there, and we'll see if they can win it. But I don't think it scares them to go up there. And I've been someone who's talked myself into it for a number of times. Every time I've seen them go, I've been in here for 3 playoff games up there, and I've talked myself into, well, maybe they can go up there and win this time. And I've been wrong. I was close in 2014. Should have been 2014. But I think they believe it's a business trip for them, and we'll see. But
you know what? In the end, the seeding's fine. It is what it is. It's fine. And like you said, I think this team is embracing the idea of going back up there. I know they from everything I've heard, they sure are looking forward to it. Ron, if this is your question, you didn't watch the game, and I'm not explaining it to you, that's your fault. That's a silly question.
No kidding. One thing I do want to mention as we kind of wrap up a little bit of that issue, because again, to me it was so dominant. I don't know how much there is to say, but
Adam Bach returning that pick 6
that was fun,
magic. That was I'm so happy for him. He gets the article because he's kind of been. He hasn't been talked about nearly as much this year as he has in previous years about how good he is. And he is phenomenal. And this is the first year we've had him for a whole season. And
I'm kind of upset he didn't get on the Buchanan.
Yeah, and that's the killer is we just don't with when you've got a really good defense across the board, you're not going to get the stats that get you on those lists.
Not stat patters.
Yeah. And but for him to get the recognition, he got Zimmer's article this week about the man in the middle. That was a fantastic article. It was really cool for him to be able to have that, and then he hits the pick six this week where, boy, God, he looked like he was going to fall. But you see the athleticism there to not fall. I really thought he was taking a tumble for sure and get back up, score that touchdown. That was awesome. Where I was sitting exploded when he scored a touchdown. So that was really fun. It's really good to see the Wildy and Mark were still hot. That's something you want to see continuing.
I think that's kind of the last point I want to mention on this, because I think that's what leads me into that's kind of where this is all going. Obviously, they still got to go play Incarnate Word, and we know how tough that game was. I see that line. Yeah, but I think maybe they're kind of resting him a little bit.
I could see
they didn't really need him.
A route here where they're doing a little bit of the Taryn Christian thing. They did the 1 year up there where they didn't run Taryn the whole year. And then they go up there and ran the piss out of him. And the other thing is, too, I think in the playoffs here, you don't want to end up with your backup quarterback hurt. And if you feel you can win the game and dominate, you don't risk him getting hurt, because
I agree.
John Bell, I mean, he looks solid, but he's not the option you want going into Fargo or the national championship.
Or if something happened to Mark.
Something happens to Mark and you're running a real risk running him the way you do. And some of it is Mason has not shown the capability to stop doing, or he has not shown the ability yet to understand the point in the game and when not to take risks. He's just all gas, no brakes. I mean, look at when he got injured, right? I mean, there was it was cool. It was fun, but it was completely unnecessary at that part of the game. It was completely unnecessary. And he was playing as just straight as the quarterback at that point, as they pulled Mark, and you kind of rely on your quarterback to not do stuff like that when you're the quarterback. And he did it. And I'm not saying it's his fault per se. I'm just saying, I don't think he has that maturity yet where you can have that trust that he's not going to necessarily put himself in situations that are dangerous to himself yet. And I think that might be some of the concern as well.
Well, and kind of leads me to the next thing I want to, and maybe the last note from this game, but like I said, everything's kind of building toward semifinal, assuming, of course, there's no major upset between here and there. That was one of the big things that we were just shocked about in Fargo was Griffin was invisible in that game. They didn't even really target him. Now, I think at the time we said, okay, NDSU's defense played really well. Maybe the secondary did something. I think I heard some people saying, well, maybe he just wasn't getting separation, all these things. And, but as we've watched the season go along, their secondary hasn't been that good up there, especially culminating with the last two games. I mean, goodness, a guy from USD who had 11 catches all year completely wasted them, and Javion Phelps, at the end of the season. So what do we think? Obviously, and obviously there were some issues going on with the offense at the time. And Mark was under a lot of pressure in that game, too. They got a lot of pressure on him. But it's a different team to where they were then to where they are now. But NDSU is different, for better and worse. But how big of a game plan? I mean, maybe this is the same thing with Taryn, that you mentioned, that Taryn analogy. The regular season game, they ran the crap out of them when they won that 2016 game, and then they brought him back to Fargo, and the Bison were ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I mean, NDSU is watching tape of all this. I think they know him, but
right,
he's got to be. If they're going back up there, he's got to have the kind of games he's having now. If they're going to win, he can't. I mean, I think they're going to use Chase in a similar way that they did.
There's potential that they look at the way Mark is playing right now and have decided that maybe switching on and off with Mason and whatnot was disrupting his rhythm, and they're just hanging with it. And because the offense is humming, it just is.
Well,
And we can say we didn't, don't necessarily need Chase, or
at least having the backfield with Mark, because I remember I think the one touchdown run that Mason had, it was one where he got the handoff from Mark, if I'm not mistaken. I know Mark was with him in the backfield.
Right. But I could see that being a thing. I'm not, I'm just spitballing, but I could see that being a thing where they're going, you know what? Until what we got working is not working, we're going to go with it because this is going really well. Because we can feel that the offense is more dangerous when you have them out there, but when you look at this team's offense before leading up to the marker game and the USD game and after, the offense, even though maybe the points are similar, it sure feels like it's humming better right now.
Yeah. And to be fair,
like it's running better.
And we'll definitely find out because obviously, same thing that they were playing pretty well, although it wasn't quite to this level, but you can make the same argument too that they weren't playing great teams before they went into Fargo. They still haven't necessarily played great teams since the end of the USD game, but it does feel like I thought one thing that was pretty telling, and I asked them, I think the players and Jimmy about this, was after that first fumble, which again is really the only knock you can have on them in this game, they shook that off pretty quick. Earlier in the season, I seem to remember, maybe my memory is a little off, but earlier in the season, I remember when they would have a mistake that you seem to have those happen early in the game too. And it seemed like that lingered more. Like the next drive, they would come out, they maybe have another turnover or it would end pretty quickly. It's just felt like when they made the mistakes early in drives early in the season, it was tougher for them to get any rhythm back. And it kind of stalled them for a while. This one, turn it over. Yeah, whatever. Made a mistake. Boom, back down the field. Like nothing had happened. I think you kind of saw the growth of the team and how far they've come offensively. Just the fact that you had something where, my God, it looked like they were just going to go, they were shredding through them on that opening series, botch a handoff, and then it's like nothing. And then it was like just nothing had happened the rest of the way. So, yeah, I think, they have to go back. I mean, I will be shocked if they go back to Fargo and Griffin Wilde is not a much bigger factor in that game, win or lose. Whatever happens for the Jackrabbits, you just, I mean, I don't think, did they really remove Mark that often from that game? Because I thought Chase was back there and they were kind of, I think you're muted, Brett.
I don't think it's necessarily that game. Sorry about that, but I don't think it's necessarily
other
that
games.
Game. It's a culmination as a whole where the offense just felt clunky. It just did. It didn't feel like it ever got into rhythm, and now it's in rhythm. Like it's been in rhythm since the first game after the USD game, honestly. And don't fix what's not broke. Sometimes.
I mean, it's interesting too because, of course, that throwback play with Brenner, where by the way, that was, and Gronowski's even said as much. That was a touchdown with Mark. That was. I took a photo where you can see. I'll say it here because I can. His ass was off the ground as the ball was being stretched. Elson has a good photo of it. It was a touchdown, and in the press conference, Gronowski says we're calling it a touchdown. I had a touchdown. It was a touchdown. It would have been way more cool, whatever. Yeah. But it's just kind of funny. But at the same time, you want to figure out a way to work Chase on the field because he's one. Goes back to the preseason. He's one of the when they did their evaluations. I think he was like one of their top 3, like the top 10 athletes on the field on the team. He was like number 2, 3, or 4 somewhere in there.
Top 10 weapons. That's why they try to get him on there.
Well, I think it was that was that too. I think athletes, like period, athletes overall, he was like in the top 5 of overall athletes. And it's just like, we got to get him on the field. But at the same time, even though Brenner's throw wasn't necessarily a dime. Maybe that play works better with Brenner than it does with Mason, because you see Mason back there, you probably know in the back, if you're a defensive coordinator, okay, he's probably doing something a little tricky with them. But you see him throw to Brenner, you probably don't think the fullback's tossing back to Gronowski. So I don't know. It's kind of a
right. That was fun. That's the first trick play they've really done this year that I remember.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
maybe one other one. I mean, I don't know.
I feel like they've done that the throwback once before, but maybe we're just not. You know, another guy who I think we'll see more of, Maxwell Woods I think it was after Montana had the field goal. Maxwell Woods had a really good kickoff return, got him in nice position.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see much of Logan Ogroski today, but again, we talked about the guys like the Taryn Christian thing. NDSU didn't see much of them the first time. I mean, the Maxwell Woods thing would be poetic because obviously he flipped from them about this time a year ago. Although, to be fair, I know SDSU had a guy who flipped on them to the Bison just recently. So, but yeah, I mean, that Maxwell Woods play was big, I thought, because, again, right after the Montana had just gotten the field goal, in theory, there's a little momentum there. He gets him out to the 43 with his kickoff return, and he was maybe a block or two away from going all the way. So, yeah, I think some good stuff there. And, yeah, I mean, we probably should wrap up pretty soon because we've been going an hour and 10 already.
I'm going deer hunting tomorrow morning out by Chamberlain, so I got to get up early.
Yeah, the crowd thing, I know we addressed this a little earlier. I like the crowds today. I mean, I talked with some Montana people. There were reporters who came from one of the stations in Montana, and they thought it was loud. I mean, I said, look, it's a different deal up here, especially when the two major universities aren't in a hub city. But the people who come are the diehards who make noise, and they agreed. It was loud. It was a loud stadium. And I'm pretty sure today was the record for second round for SDSU.
I was going to say, I think that's our largest second round crowd that I can remember. And I think people need to remember when you talk about this, we didn't magically start having sellouts in the regular season game. It built and built and built. And I have to remind myself of that a lot because I get frustrated with it. You're like, God damn it, we sold out. How many games? We averaged 18,500 fans. And, there was more people at Montana State game than both South Dakota schools combined today. That's good. There was more wins in South Dakota than there was in Montana today. Anyways.
Well, Bozeman,
there's more national titles in South Dakota too. So I guess you could take with all that attendance and $1.
Well, I don't think that's technically true because I think Montana has 2 and Montana State has 1. So.
Oh, we'll fix that.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
In this century, there are more national titles in South Dakota than there are in Montana.
Good recovery. I mean, look, Bozeman has 57,000 people in it. That's more. That's almost triple the size of Brookings. Vermilion is 11,000? Like 5 times. I mean, again, I've said this, and that has to be said. I know people don't want. It shouldn't be the catch-all excuse. I'm not saying, but whenever the Fargo people or the Bozeman, and I think Missoula's population is. I'll check that out here real quick.
Montana State has 3. Yeah, Montana State.
Missoula's population is 77,000.
Right. Montana State has 3 national titles. Yeah, and everyone who was alive to watch those national titles have Social Security numbers in the single digits.
All right, let's talk about playoff era titles. I don't know what they were doing before 1977. Like small college era titles. I no one counts that crap. Yeah. Come on. But it matters when you're. I mean, we're talking about 2 schools in this state that are in 2 of the smaller Division I towns in the country. And they're both trying to draw from Sioux Falls, but your hub city is still 45, 50 minutes away. I mean, that, I say this with Fargo. They always, when they brag about their attendance or when they're having attendance issues, I'm like, you're in a metro of 250. Imagine if you put the North Dakota State in Minot and tell me you're going to get 19,000 a week easily, or Jamestown, which is an hour away. I mean, when you have to make Wyoming in Division I has these issues. They're the only school in Wyoming, but it's in kind of a remote location, so they don't, even if they have a great team, they don't always sell it out. It's just the reality. You're going to have, when you have a fan base that
building a culture is what it is.
And
a culture of going. Montana State and Montana fans have been going since they were kids, and their parents went when they were kids, and all that, and it grows on itself. SDSU has not had that, and they don't comprehend that because there's nobody around them that has had a good FBS program. They want to talk about how there's nobody around South Dakota State, and that's why they have this. Nebraska is 3 hours away.
And they were hours away. They were God tier.
Yes, they were Alabama. They were Alabama for a decade plus. And SDSU was a mediocre D2. Everybody was a Nebraska fan. Nobody gave a shit about SDSU football. You want the explanation? There's your explanation.
Oh, by the way,
it's not Iowa, my fault if you're too fucking stupid to understand it out there.
Iowa's nearby too. The Hawkeyes were a big deal in the 80s. I mean, and again, as we said at the top of the show with the playoffs, not only did you have those giant 1A schools,
right?
But these schools never made the playoffs. The Bison, with their tradition, I mean, if you're in Fargo, your parents and grandparents were seeing playoff games at Old Dakota Field in the 80s and 70s. They didn't have that here. So
no, they didn't. We were middling and mediocre. It's building the fan base is what it takes time.
So
yeah, and here Ben brings it up. He's literally said this to someone today. I pointed at my kids and said that when they're bringing my grandkids in 10 to 15 years, we'll be selling out December games.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. I mean, it's starting in the recruiting to start to take hold. When they talked to Griffin Wilde and he had SDSU posters up in his bedroom.
Yep.
I don't. And if you're not from this area, you don't understand how huge of a deal it is for that to be a thing. Because it's all Cornhuskers and Iowa Hawkeyes and then some Iowa State if you go back 15 years. Yeah. It's been an uphill slog.
It wasn't even that long ago that Seth Benson was committed to come here, and then he flipped to Iowa in the 11th hour. I'm not saying that still isn't a possibility with guys, but it's still going to happen. But there's actually, it's a little more likely now that guys might stay. I mean, it was a slam dunk. Those guys would leave before. It's a little harder for them now. It's becoming a little harder for them to go because this is a more attractive thing than it was even 5 years ago.
And some of that is, to be fair to the Yotes, they have some of that problem as well. They're way further in the stages, and they need to continue being good. In order,
it's going to take time with them too. It's going to take time,
and it takes time, and it builds, and it's frustrating. But Montana and Montana State fans just straight don't have a concept of what it is. They don't have a concept of how new good division.
I'll throw NDSU fans in there too.
Region. Yeah,
I'll throw.
They've calmed down a pretty good amount.
Calm down,
since their attendance has gone down, and we have,
but their attendance
outdrew them this year.
Their attendance issue is largely the apathy right now. They know, and I don't blame them to an extent because you do assume you're going to win all these games when you usually win 50-0, and although today they definitely could have used maybe some more at the start, but flip side of that is, man, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I prefer these playoff games. I don't care if it's a blowout. I don't care if it's close. I'd rather be playing football in December. I mean, it's just these games are, dude. I'm not doing the taco bet. These two games are
Ben is betting Brian.
Oh, okay. Somebody was trying to offer me. I'm like, I know they're going to probably kick the crap out of Mercer.
He wants you to bet tacos with him in the worst way. If you pick,
I think they're both going to be blowouts. I'm not betting these freaking tacos, man. Good God. Or they're going to be both. They're both probably going to be blowouts. I mean, I think we'll see. Incarnate Word, it was a good game the first time, but I did ask this of Adam Bach, and I think the defense has a little. if there's one thing that would be scary, it's it's that defense with a chip on their shoulder. That was not a good game for them at the start of the season, but they were struggling a little bit. They just, come off the Oklahoma State loss. It was early. I don't want to say they wanted a mulligan, but I think they definitely wanted another shot at that. They would love to play that game again, and now they get a shot. The weather's looking all right for next week. I think the early forecast is 38 to 40. So it's not going to be, unless we get a bad windstorm like we got a year ago, which is possible. But in that case, it probably leans more toward SDSU because that team needs to pass, Incarnate Word. Now, you would assume they're going to do something different, try to throw some wrench in there. But it was 13 to 6 today. I haven't really.
Well, I encourage people who if you're just going off of that score, to take a peek at the box score, because for it to be 13 to 6 is genuinely crazy. And I might be going soon for a cranky baby, but if you look at the team stats, rushing, Incarnate Word 255 yards, Villanova 35, passing 182 yards, Incarnate Word 103 for Villanova. So the total offense was 437 yards to 138, and you only win by a touchdown. And
they didn't turn it over a bunch either.
No, so that's just a fluke. I think it's just a fluky game. They just didn't finish drives. So I caution anybody getting too overconfident because you're just looking at that score.
We know Villanova plays good. Villanova is opportunistic. They always have been. We'll see. And then I think just briefly, so we get you out of here and get to that cranky baby. USD, like I said, that offense is rolling. They've got, like I said, there is a toughness to them. They have a grit. They've certainly come back in a lot of situations, and I kind of thought Tarleton was going to give them more problems because that is a program that is investing in they may end up being an FBS before long, but it's a tech. We saw it from Abilene, those Texas schools. They've got some athletes. They bring in some transfers. You just never know what you're going to get from those schools down there. And like you've said before, you get these unique matchups. You don't know you just don't know. Like I said, I am a little worried. I would be a little concerned if I were a Coyote fan about what's going on within the secondary because they got burned a little bit by NDSU. And they did recover today and get 3 interceptions in that second half, which turned the tide. And they needed to. Two of them came when they were down by 7, and Tarleton could have made it a 14-point game. If that becomes a 14-point game, they might lose. So, credit to them. Their backs were to the wall. And, like I said, Jimmy made a good comment today. You never know when your national championship is going to be in this tournament. Because if you don't have a good game, if you take an opponent lightly, your tournament's done. But they're gonna have to play. They're gonna have to play a lot better. And the irony with Tarleton was they had the second best running back in the FCS. It was Kayvon Britton, who was he came into this game with just under 1,900 yards rushing, and you kind of figured, okay, if they're gonna win, he's gonna have to pop off and have a big game. And he wasn't terrific. He carried 24 times for 86 yards. They held that team under 100 yards, which is kind of typical of them. They've had a good rush defense, but that's concerning that they've now given up they gave up close to 400 passing yards. So, but they ran the ball well, which was expected. Tarleton never really stopped them. Bauman, 18 of 22. He is just on a very good roll right now. Receivers were all good. They, like I said, we'll see. Davis is going to be a challenge for them because now they go from the second best running back to the guy who legitimately might have been snubbed at least being the top 3 of the Walter Payton and Lan Larison. He is, but I do think their run defense is legit. It's as solid as the one thing I've always had a little bit of a worry on with USD is they don't have the depth on the defensive line. They don't rotate the way SCSU does. So sometimes they can get a little worn down. We'll see if that becomes an issue. But Davis took care of Illinois State 42-10. That game was tied at 7 after 1, and then Davis took him out in the second quarter. Larison today, 3 touchdown runs, $104 on the ground. I think Miles Hastings was the quarterback for a couple of the playoff games here a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah, he was.
He threw for 403 today.
Yeah, they had a day. They did okay. Lan Larison is the only person who has more yards, all-purpose yards, than Lan Larison is the cat from Boise State. Yeah.
Yeah, Janty.
He's the only one.
It's a little crazy he did not get at least. I mean, I think it's going to go to Miller, maybe Malott. It's a little crazy he didn't get the third invite at least get the third invite, but he's playing with a little chip on his shoulder. But yeah, I mean, they're clearly a pretty multi-dimensional team because Hastings has been. I mean, that playoff game with SDSU was in 2021, and this guy is obviously he's a COVID dude. So I think that's going to be a really good game. USC's got going to have their hands full, but as you said, you can't really you can't glean too much week to week because everything changes. And yep, that's about it. I mean, other ones.
One thing I will say, looking forward to Saturday against Incarnate Word. It looks to be a high of 33, and I saw a lot of posts from people watching the game that said Incarnate Word looked like they've never played in a game without sunshine before, and it was 50 degrees. So that could be a factor. But I do have to run because I have a fussy baby.
Hey, the little one. Well, everybody, we will see you next week. And again, hope you enjoyed the playoffs. Quarterfinal, the Elite 8 coming at you next week. We'll join you about the same time, same bat channel. Enjoy your Sunday, and we'll talk to you next week.
Later.